The day I found $250,000 in cash under my dead son's bed, I realized everything I thought I knew about his death was a lie. My name is Roland Thatcher. I'm 52 years old, and for 20 years I worked as a warehouse supervisor at Brennan Logistics. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated, just honest work, making sure shipments got where they needed to go. My son Colby was 24 when he died, just starting his career at Ridgefield Trucking Company as a dispatcher. He was a good kid, the kind who called his old man every Sunday night without fail, who still asked for advice about everything from changing his car's oil to dealing with difficult coworkers. My ex-wife, Jolene, used to be the love of my life. But the woman I married and the woman she became were two different people. The Jolene I knew was warm, soft-spoken, always humming while she cooked dinner. The Jolene that stood beside me at our son's funeral, cold, calculated, and grieving in a way that didn't look like grief at all, more like relief. The police said Colby fell asleep at the wheel. Single vehicle accident. No alcohol, no drugs, just a tragedy stamped into a report and handed back to me like a receipt. I accepted it. I mourned like a father is supposed to. I told myself life was cruel sometimes, but at least it wasn't malicious. I didn't know yet that everything, every tear, every condolence, every "I'm so sorry for your loss," was built on a lie. 3 weeks after the funeral, I went to clean out his apartment. I wasn't ready, but someone had to do it. His landlord wanted the keys back. I was packing up his things, shirts, old mail, a photo of us at a fishing dock, when I noticed the bed frame was heavier on one side. I pulled it away from the wall and saw a loose floorboard. Under it, a duffel bag, unzipped, stuffed with neatly banded stacks of cash. $250,000. My son worked a $46,000 a year job. So where did $250,000 come from? And why did he hide it? That was the moment the father in me stopped grieving, and the investigator in me woke up. I just stood there staring at the money like it didn't belong to reality, like I had opened the wrong floorboard in the wrong apartment. Colby was responsible, predictable, borderline boring. The kind of kid who still bought store-brand cereal, even after he got promoted because name brands cost too much for the same taste. Nothing about him said $250,000 in cash. I didn't touch the money at first. I just knelt beside it with my hands shaking, waiting for logic to show up and explain how this made sense. But logic stayed quiet, so I started looking deeper. I searched the closet, the shelves, the dresser drawers, and that's when I found it, tucked behind a stack of old invoices. A small, steel-reinforced lockbox with a biometric thumb reader. Not a cheap one either. The kind used by small security firms and private couriers. Heavy. Discreet. Designed so you don't break into it unless you're willing to destroy it. My son didn't own anything like this when he was alive. And somehow, the box felt more important than the money. I put everything in the trunk of my car, locked it, and drove home without turning on the radio. The road was quiet except for my breathing. That silence felt heavier than anything I'd carried since his funeral. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes I saw him, my kid, smiling like he used to before anything in this world hardened him. Was I mourning the wrong version of him? Was there a life he lived that I didn't know about? Or worse, a life he ran from? The next morning, questions turned into suspicion, and suspicion turned into instincts I couldn't ignore. So I did the first thing I always do when something doesn't add up. I started tracing patterns. I pulled Colby's bank records, and nothing in them looked unusual. No large withdrawals, no odd deposits, no movement that even hinted at $250,000, let alone something worth locking away. But the absence of evidence was evidence. That meant cash flow. Off the record. Side job? No. Drugs? Doesn't line up with his behavior. Debt repayment? Maybe blackmail? Possible. Hidden employment? Very possible. I kept digging. Next, I called his closest friend, Mason, the guy who helped him move into that apartment. But the second I said the words lockbox and cash, Mason's voice changed. He got tight, hesitant. He said he didn't know anything, then rushed off the phone like someone was standing there listening. That was red flag number 1. Red flag number 2 came later that afternoon when I drove by Ridgefield Trucking, the company he worked for. I expected a warehouse parking lot, a few rigs coming and going, a simple dispatch office. What I saw instead, a massive facility surrounded by private security, armed guards at the gate, cameras every 40 feet. That wasn't logistics. That was lockdown. A dispatcher doesn't work at a building like that. Colby wasn't just pushing shipment. Logs, he was doing something else, something he wasn't supposed to talk about. And then came red flag number 3, the one that punched me in the gut. I called Jolene. I didn't tell her about the cash. Not yet. I just asked if she knew anything about what Colby was really doing at Ridgefield. She didn't even let me finish the sentence before she snapped, "Let it go, Roland. He's gone. Leave it alone." Not, "I don't know what you're talking about." Not, "What do you mean?" Not concern, just fear disguised as anger. And here's the part that kept replaying in my head afterward. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded like a woman who already knew exactly what I had stumbled onto. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table with the lockbox in front of me. I pressed my thumb against the biometric pad, even though I knew it wouldn't open. It flashed red. Unauthorized. Whatever was in that box was something he died protecting, and someone out there probably knew I now had it. That was the moment I stopped asking questions and started hunting for answers. The next morning I drove back to Ridgefield, but this time I didn't pull up to the main entrance. I sat across the road in a diner with a view of the East Gate, the one trucks used to come and go. I watched for 2 hours. No logos on the semis. No publicly listed fleet numbers. Everything was blacked out or unmarked. Not standard logistics. Not even close. Real trucking companies want branding. It's advertising. This was secrecy. While I watched, something else caught my attention. Every driver entered through the building's side door, not the lobby. They scanned ID badges through what looked like a federal-level security panel. Some even had escort clearance. You don't escort dispatchers. Whatever Ridgefield was, it wasn't just a freight company. And Colby worked there. When I got back home, I dug through his things again, this time with intent. Engineering manuals, route codes, a small notebook filled with numbers and abbreviations that looked like nonsense until I realized the handwriting wasn't random. It was structured, like he was tracking something. But there were gaps, blank spots where something had been torn out. That's when I found a receipt tucked behind a photo frame. A security locksmith's invoice from 3 months earlier, for biometric override technology. Not for opening a safe, but for protecting one. That meant someone else had once tried to access that lockbox, and Colby paid to have it reinforced. Now I understood why he hid it under the floor. He didn't just own that lockbox, he was protecting whatever was inside it from someone. The question was, who? That evening, I drove to Mason's apartment. I didn't call first because I knew where that would go, straight to voicemail. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, his face went pale. Not annoyed, not surprised, afraid. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him like he didn't want anyone inside to hear us. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just asked what was Colby working on. Mason's throat tightened. His eyes darted toward the parking lot like he expected someone to be watching. Then he said a sentence that changed everything. He wasn't supposed to die. Not he didn't deserve to die. Not it was an accident. Not I'm sorry for your loss. He wasn't supposed to die. That meant someone intended something to happen but lost control of it. My pulse started hammering. I asked him what he meant, but he backed away like a man who had already said too much. He kept repeating, "I can't," get involved under his breath until it sounded like a prayer. I stepped closer. "Tell me who he was crossing." He looked at me, scared, cornered, and cracked just enough, and whispered, "Not who. What?" Then he shut the door in my face. I drove home more certain than ever. My son hadn't died in a random crash. He had gotten himself tangled in something dangerous, maybe even criminal, but not for greed. If he wanted the money for himself, it wouldn't have still been in a hidden duffel bag. No fingerprints. No spending. He wasn't profiting from something. He was protecting something. And that meant whatever was inside the lockbox mattered more than the cash. That night, while I stared at the biometric panel, I caught myself talking to him the way I used to when he was little. "Son, what did you get yourself into?" And somewhere deep down, I could feel it. He hadn't been working for Ridgefield. He'd been investigating Ridgefield. And I wasn't holding inheritance. I was holding evidence, the kind people kill for. The first sign that someone knew I had the lockbox came 2 days later. It was subtle, almost easy to miss, but I've lived long enough to know when something is off. I left my house early that morning to head to the hardware store, and when I got into my truck, the driver's seat had been pushed slightly back. I don't push it back. I don't need to. And the floor mat had new scuff marks. Boots, not shoes. No broken glass. No forced entry. No theft. Just someone sitting in my truck. Looking, probably searching, but not finding, which meant they were looking for something they believed I hadn't found yet. That told me 2 things. They didn't know about the cash. They didn't know the lockbox was already in my possession. They were still hoping it was somewhere in Colby's apartment. Or worse, that I didn't even know it existed. That gave me time. But not much. I spent the rest of the day digging into Ridgefield the same way Colby must have. You don't hide $250,000 and reinforce a biometric lockbox because you're bored. There had to be a trail, even a faint one. I started looking at trucking records. I've managed shipping departments long enough to know how freight should move. Ridgefield's public shipments didn't match their inbound trucking logs. Too few loads, too many security escorts, and not a single listed bill of lading tied to federal or state manifests. In my world, that's called a cover company. A shell. A front, not for drugs. That kind of operation would be sloppy, noisy, territorial. No, this felt disciplined. Quiet. Structured. Government level or organized crime level. And sometimes those two are closer than people like to admit. That night, I checked my security cameras twice before going to bed. Nothing unusual. But at 2:17 a.m., a motion alert woke me. I pulled up the feed. A car slowed down in front of my house. Paused, headlights cutting across my living room window. Then pulled away. Scouting, surveillance patterning. They weren't afraid of me. They were cataloging me. The next day, I tried calling Ridgefield, pretending to be HR from a sister company. The receptionist stonewalled me immediately. Not in a let me redirect you way, but in a we don't acknowledge anything that isn't pre-authorized way. Then she asked for my caller ID number. Legitimate. Companies don't do that. That meant every inbound call was logged, tracked, cross-checked. Colby was never supposed to bring Ridgefield home with him. Whatever he uncovered internally. And when he realized how bad it was, he got scared enough to hide physical evidence. Fear doesn't make a man stash money. But truth does. That evening I tried once more with Mason. I didn't go to his apartment. I waited at the parking lot near his work. When he saw me walk toward him, he whispered through his teeth, "Roland, you're going to get yourself killed. You don't know who they are." I asked him who they were. He shook his head. He kept scanning the lot like he expected someone to be listening. Then he said something that didn't just land in my ears. It landed in my blood. Colby was trying to leak something. He wasn't stealing from Ridgefield. He was documenting it. And when they caught on, it was already too late. My chest tightened. Too late for what? He swallowed hard, like he was forcing the truth down his throat instead of letting it out, and finally said they knew he was going to expose them. He didn't crash that night, Roland. They crashed him. There it was, said out loud. The thing my gut already knew. My son was murdered. Before I could press him for more, Mason backed away like he couldn't stand in one place any longer without putting a target on himself. And just before he got into his car, he muttered, "If you have the lockbox, you're already in it deeper than he was." Then he drove off. That was the moment my grief stopped being grief and turned into purpose. Someone killed my boy. Someone tried to wipe the evidence. But they missed a piece. And that piece was sitting on my kitchen table, waiting to be opened. 2 days after talking to Mason, the first direct threat arrived. It came in the form of a phone call. No caller ID, no origin data, just a cold line opening with silence on the other end. I didn't speak first. I've handled enough shipping disputes and insurance claim calls to know that the one who speaks first gives the ground. Then a man's voice finally broke the silence. Calm, polite, like someone reading a weather forecast. "Mr. Thatcher, we understand you've been looking through your son's belongings. We'd like to strongly advise you to stop, not ask, not recommend. Advise, the kind of word people use when threat is disguised as courtesy." I didn't respond. The voice continued. "Some things Colby was involved in are better left sealed. He was a good worker. His death was tragic. Let sleeping dogs lie." My jaw clenched. I asked him, "Who is this?" There was a pause, then a half chuckle. "You don't need my name. Just understand, what you're searching for won't bring him back." Then the line went dead. I didn't get anger right away. I got clarity. These weren't thugs calling me. They weren't amateurs. These were controlled men. Men who don't raise their voice because they don't need to. The kind of men who don't threaten twice. They were warning me because they didn't yet know what I knew, or didn't know what I physically had. That was the moment I decided to stop tiptoeing around the truth. I went back to the lockbox. I stared at it for nearly an hour. Steel casing, reinforced interior, secondary backup fingerprint sensor. This thing wasn't consumer level. It was mil-spec grade, maybe government surplus, maybe privately manufactured. Whatever was in it, Colby knew it was damning. The scanner only had 2 saved prints. One belonged to him, and the other? My stomach twisted. I had to be sure. I contacted an old buddy of mine, Dean, a former machine shop operator who now did side work for corporate security contractors. Not criminals, but the kind of people who worry about espionage and whistleblowers. If anyone knew how to reverse engineer a safe, it was him. He came over that night. When he saw the lockbox, his eyebrows went up. "This isn't storage," he said. "This is leverage." That word stuck. Leverage. He tried a thermal bypass. Nothing. Tried interrupting the biometric relay. Nothing. Tried system cycling. Locked down even harder. "Your kid paid good money to make sure this never gets opened by force," he muttered. "Whatever's inside is either evidence or insurance." "Insurance against what?" I asked. He shrugged, but not in ignorance. "In warning. You ever notice how billion-dollar companies never go to court when their crimes hit the news? They don't fight. They trade. Somebody up top always has a file that can crush someone else. That box?" He tapped it with his knuckle. "That's a queen piece. Your son died holding it." And that was when I realized something grim. Someone didn't just want the box back. Someone needed it back. Dean packed up his tools. Before he left, he said something that would echo in the back of my mind all night. "If someone calls you again, they already know where you live. If they show up next, they're not coming to talk." The moment the door closed, I checked the window. The same car that drove by a few nights earlier was parked half a block down, engine running. They weren't scouting anymore. They were waiting. That's when I made a decision, not out of fear, but out of strategy. If they wanted the box, I wouldn't hide. I would bait them. Because to flush out predators, you don't run inward. You drag them into daylight. If there's one thing I've learned in 52 years, it's this. Predators don't fear what's hidden. They fear what might become visible. So if they wanted silence, then the smartest move I had was to make noise, but not loud noise, strategic noise, the kind that flushes men out of shadows. The next morning I didn't go to Ridgefield. I didn't call Mason. I didn't threaten or confront anyone directly. Instead, I went somewhere no one would expect a warehouse supervisor to go. A law firm specializing in whistleblower protections. I didn't walk in with the box. I didn't bring evidence. I just asked a few legal questions, hypothetically, about a deceased relative discovering corporate misconduct. I made sure I used the right buzzwords: misappropriation, federal oversight, sealed discovery, protected testimony, and I let their paralegal make a copy of my driver's license for file creation. Not because I wanted legal counsel, but because I wanted a record that I had begun a paper trail. If Ridgefield had government reach, which it clearly did, news of that inquiry would travel. And the moment they believed I might take the box to attorneys or journalists, they'd panic. Pressure reveals identity faster than fear. That afternoon, I received a second call. The same calm voice, only this time the politeness slipped. "Mr. Thatcher, you're walking into a situation you don't understand." This time I replied, "Understand enough to know my son didn't die by accident." Silence. Not denial, not rebuttal, just silence, the kind that tells you the truth without words. The voice finally said, "Your son crossed a line. Don't make the same mistake." He hung up. Not a warning anymore. A directive. That meant they were losing patience. Good. Because while they watched me, I was watching them too. That night I tested something. I placed the lockbox in plain sight on my dining room table. Lights on, curtains slightly parted. Just enough that anyone watching the house could see it. Not hidden, not stored, displayed. A message. I know what I have, and I am not afraid to show it exists. 37 minutes later, the same car drove past my house. They saw it. I sat there, palms flat on the table, staring into the dark window reflection, waiting to see if they'd take the bait tonight. They didn't. But the next morning I found proof they'd escalated. My mailbox flag was snapped off. Not broken accidentally, but snapped. A clean, intentional break. A silent calling card. Do not send anything out. Do not share anything, or else. That was good. They weren't ready to use force yet, which meant they still weren't sure how much I knew, or how many people I might have already told. Leverage works both ways. That night I studied the lockbox again, but this time not as cargo, as logic. My son wasn't reckless. If he hid the money under the bed, but the lockbox separately, and reinforced it, that meant the contents of the lockbox were more dangerous than the cash by magnitude. The cash was secondary. The box was the threat. And suddenly, a new thought hit me. What if Colby didn't plan to open it alone? What if he expected someone else to open it after him? Someone who shared his prints? Someone in case of emergency. I looked at the backup port on the side. A fail-safe biometric relay for dual authentication. 2 fingerprints. Not one. Not master level. Witness level. That meant Colby wasn't just building evidence, he was building a dead man's trigger. If anything happened to him, someone else was meant to finish what he started. And if Ridgefield knew that, if they suspected I could open that box with him, then I wasn't just a threat. I was the final link. They didn't want to intimidate me. They wanted to erase me the second they confirmed I had access, which meant I couldn't wait for them to make the next move. I had to force it, and I knew exactly how, not by hiding the box, but by protecting it, the one way corporate ghosts fear most, by making sure that if anything happened to me, the box wouldn't disappear. It would go public. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at the kitchen table with the lockbox open in front of me. The records and manifests spread out like a confession my son hadn't been able to make out loud. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Colby, not dead, not in a coffin, but sitting across from me, nervous, scared, trying to tell me something and never getting the chance. By sunrise, my grief had turned into something sharper. I wasn't just a father mourning a son anymore. I was a man who needed the truth. When Ridgefield Trucking opened for the day, I was already in the parking lot waiting for them. I went straight inside, past the receptionist who tried to stop me. I didn't yell, didn't threaten anyone. I just walked through that building like a storm that already decided where it wanted to land. I found Mark in his office again. This time he didn't pretend to be surprised. To see me, I laid the manifest down on his desk and watched his expression change inch by inch. Denial. Recognition. Fear. He didn't bother lying this time. You found something, he said quietly. I found enough to know Colby didn't die because of bad luck, I replied. He died because someone wanted him silent. For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then he sat down, lowered his head, and rubbed his temples like a man who had been holding the truth so long it was crushing him. He wasn't part of it, Mark said at last. Not willingly. That sentence nearly dropped me to my knees, because it meant everything I feared was true. I asked him to start talking, and he did. He told me Ridgefield had been infiltrated by an off-the-books contractor, not officially on payroll, just someone using the company's logistics network as cover. They would divert specific pallets for a few hours before the official route resumed. On paper, it looked like delays, supply chain hiccups, nothing suspicious. But those pallets weren't carrying ordinary cargo. They were carrying fentanyl, not grams. Not street-level, bulk, enough to poison a city. I sat there staring at him, stunned. Not because he said drugs, but because I realized my son had stumbled onto something with stakes far bigger than corporate theft. He figured it out, Mark said. He traced the seal numbers and timestamps. He tracked which loads were disappearing and coming back heavier than they should. And he came to you. I asked. Yes, he said, voice tight. 2 weeks before he died. My hands clenched on the armrest of the chair. 2 weeks, 14 days between uncovering the truth and ending up dead. What did you do? I asked. I told him to walk away, Mark said. But he wouldn't. Your son wasn't built to look the other way. That line hit me like a punch because it was true. Colby wasn't reckless, he was righteous. He believed people should do the right thing, even when it cost them, even when it ended badly. Who runs it? I asked. Who is behind all of this? Mark hesitated, not because he didn't know, but because saying it out loud made him part of it. Roland, he said slowly. This operation doesn't start here. Ridgefield is just the shell. The people behind this have money, protection, infrastructure, lawyers, politicians, enforcers. If they think you're digging, he looked me straight in the eyes, they won't threaten you. They'll erase you. Silence filled the room like smoke. I realized in that moment that I wasn't holding evidence. I was holding a detonator. I wasn't just chasing justice. I was stepping into a war my son had already died fighting. I stood up, gathered the folder, and looked him in the eye. If they killed my boy once, I said, my voice steady, then they failed. Because I'm still here. And now, I was done asking questions politely. Now I was hunting. I didn't go home after leaving Ridgefield. I drove aimlessly for a while, not because I was lost, but because I needed to let my anger cool into strategy. Rage makes noise. Revenge requires silence. I kept thinking about the lockbox, about how Colby had hidden it, not destroyed it. That meant he knew something might happen to him. He prepared for death. 24 years old, already planning for people to lie about how he died. That wasn't paranoia. That was foresight. That meant there was more. Something I still hadn't found. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I had a direction again. Not answers, but momentum. The house felt different when I walked inside. It felt like a crime scene that had been rearranged to look normal. I went straight to his old room, not for memories this time, but for patterns. I looked at it like he was still trying to send me a message. Colby wasn't messy. He was methodical. That was the kind of detail people overlook until they're searching for meaning. I checked the bed frame again, the dresser, the closet. Nothing. Then I noticed something small, barely noticeable. The carpet near his desk was slightly looser in one corner. Not pulled up, not ripped, just moved. Intentionally. I knelt down and peeled it back. There was a second hiding place, a thin metal compartment screwed into the floor joist, a custom panel someone had taken the time to install. Inside were 2 flash drives, a prepaid phone still in its plastic sleeve, and a written note with one sentence in my son's handwriting. If anything happens to me, don't trust her. Her, not them. Her. My stomach turned cold because in that moment I knew exactly who he meant, not the cartel, not the network, not the contractors, Jolene, my ex-wife, the woman currently cashing out an $800,000 insurance payout. I sat back against the wall as the realization washed through me like ice water. All the bitterness, all the distance, all the sudden hostility in the aftermath of his death. It wasn't grief. It was guilt wearing a mask. She didn't just know something, she was involved. I didn't open the flash drives yet. I didn't grab my keys. I just sat there breathing through a truth that rewrote every memory I still had of her. Colby wasn't warning me about criminals. He was warning me about his own mother. And now everything made sense. How fast she signed paperwork. How quickly she pushed for cremation. How aggressively she kept me out of the details. How she cried, not like a mother who lost a son, but like a woman who feared a secret being uncovered. She had been living afraid of exposure, not broken by loss. The next move wasn't anger. It wasn't confrontation. It was preparation. I didn't tell anyone about the panel. I put the items in my jacket and replaced everything exactly as I found it, because now I knew the truth. I wasn't hunting strangers anymore. I was walking into betrayal threaded through bloodlines. And betrayal inside a family isn't a crime of opportunity. It's a calculation. I sat at the edge of his bed for a few minutes, staring at the wall as if I could still hear him breathing in that room. Somewhere deep in the grief, a different kind of emotion surfaced. Not rage, not vengeance. Clarity. My son hadn't died by accident. He hadn't fallen into the wrong situation. He had been removed, silenced, and someone he trusted had helped them do it. When I finally stood up, I wasn't just a father anymore. I was the last witness left alive, and I wasn't staying quiet. Not now. Not ever. The next morning I didn't go to work. I sat at my kitchen table with the prepaid phone, the note, and the 2 flash drives lined up like evidence. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I wasn't overwhelmed. I was awake, fully awake, for the first time since the funeral. I plugged the first flash drive into my laptop, half expecting nothing, half expecting everything. It opened to a single folder. Inside were 37 audio recordings, all time-stamped, all labeled by date and initials, CT, Colby Thatcher. He'd been recording conversations. The first few were small, workplace complaints, dispatch logs, route disputes, nothing unusual. But then, entry 12? The voices changed. A man speaking in code, Colby's tone cautious, hidden deals, off-the-books runs, payment drops, and then in entry 16, I heard her voice, not in the background, not passing by, talking, negotiating, participating. Jolene. She wasn't just aware, she was part of it. Calm, businesslike, no hesitation. Like this was just another Tuesday to her, and the way she spoke, cold, polished, rehearsed. This wasn't a desperate mother being pulled in by accident. This was a woman who had experience. Colby hadn't stumbled into danger. He had stumbled onto her. I paused the recording and just sat there listening to silence bleed through the room. The son I thought worked an honest job had uncovered something, and instead of going to me, he tried to protect me the only way he knew how, by leaving proof behind. I clicked on the next file. This time the tone was different, urgent, tense. Colby. They're changing routes. Someone's feeding them schedules. Unknown voice. Doesn't matter. Just keep your mouth shut and your head down. Colby hesitated in the recording. I could hear him wrestling between fear and conscience. And then the last few seconds. Your mother has already signed. Just play along. The moment I heard that sentence, I felt something in my chest cave in. Signed what? The insurance papers to profit off his death. Before he was dead? When I reached recording 21, the pieces finally locked into place. A different male voice, tense, low, impatient, said, "If he doesn't comply, we cut him loose. The policy's already active. She knows the timeline." She knew the timeline. My ex-wife didn't just watch this happen. She gave them the window to do it. She stood on the side of the men who would later put my son in the ground. They didn't silence him after he talked. They silenced him because she told them he might, and all at once the grief inside me hardened into something colder than anger ever could be. Purpose. For 24 years I believed motherhood meant protection. She believed motherhood meant leverage. I closed the laptop without listening to the rest. Not because I was done, but because I had heard enough to know what came next. I needed to confirm everything legally. No emotion, no screaming, no accusations. Evidence first. When I stood up from the table, I wasn't the man who found a bag of cash anymore. I was the man who was going to bury the truth she built her new life on, and I was going to bury her with it, but not loudly, not immediately, not violently. The worst revenge isn't chaos, it's exposure. Let the world see exactly who she is, with no mask left to hide behind. Because when a liar burns, the flames aren't what destroy them. The truth is, and I had it, documented, time-stamped, preserved. Everything after this wouldn't be grief. It would be justice wearing my son's name. I didn't move like a man possessed. I moved like a man with a plan. I took the drives, the recordings, the manifests, everything Colby had collected, and I walked into the district attorney's office. I didn't shout. I didn't pound fists. I handed them the evidence, the timestamps, and the list of names. I let the recordings speak. Colby's voice, Jolene's voice, the men who treated our son like a liability. The DA listened. He didn't promise miracles. He promised process. Investigations followed the sort of slow, methodical thoroughness they don't teach you in grief counseling. Subpoenas, interviews, forensics on the Lockbox. Ridgefield's shell companies blinked under legal lights. Jolene hired lawyers that smelled of desperation. She avoided my eyes the one time we were forced into the same room. When the warrants came, she stopped pretending ignorance. The insurance check was frozen pending inquiry. The news came not as a roar, but as a steady drumbeat. Public records, court filings, official statements. Exposure did what threats could not. When they arrested her, it wasn't with the theatrics you see on TV. It was a quiet, bureaucratic moment, paperwork, cuffs, a single hollow apology she didn't deserve to make. The charges were heavy. Conspiracy, facilitating distribution, insurance fraud, and ultimately, manslaughter. Ridgefield's contractors scattered. A few names were carved into indictments. The DA told me they couldn't bring back my son, and he was right. No court could give me that. But they could prevent others from being trapped into the same silence. The fallout changed everything. I testified. I watched the courtroom as strangers who loved my boy with no memory of his smile readied their pens. I cried there, quiet, clean tears, because this time my grief had a direction. After the verdicts, life didn't return to normal. It returned to honest work, to small routines, to honoring a son who chose truth over his own safety. I took the cash from the duffel and donated it to a fund in Colby's name. Education and recovery programs for kids trapped by the same machine that killed him. If there's a final line to this story, it's that truth, when held and wielded, can be a weapon sharper than any revenge. I didn't break her. The law did what I couldn't. And in that slow, legal justice, I found a kind of peace. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment, tell me your city. If this story moved you, subscribe for more. I read every message.